We are going to talk about the industrial internet, machine-to-machine technologies, IoT, depending on your vernacular, your buzzword of the day. What I want to take you through are some trends that we're seeing in the enterprise space, not only domestically in the United States, obviously, but on the global stage. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I want to start off with some stats just to ground you. There's an interesting study that was done just a few months ago that indicated that about 86% of the CEOs that were actually surveyed, and these were surveyed not only in the US but again globally, 86% of those CEOs said that technology will transform the way they do business. Okay? Now that could be technology used to streamline their operations and expense cutting. It could lead to revenue generating ideas, or it could be both. Okay? And so if the CEO has this agenda, you can bet that the IT organization, right, the CTO, the CIO, Chief Security Officer, the marketing operations organization, sales, etc., all start to fall in line as well, right? How can we take technology and transform the business? Just a quick show of hands. How many of you have built and deployed a machine-to-machine solution? Okay. How many of you, if I were to say, fast forward 3 years from now, believe that you will have a machine-to-machine type solution, whether it's on the consumer side or the enterprise side, in production? Okay. What's interesting is, depending on which analyst you like to subscribe to, some believe that there'll be between 20 and 50 billion devices connected to the internet by 2020. We're not going to argue over 20 versus 50. The point is it's up and to the right. It's a large number. And many of those devices may be connected with low power networks, some with Wi-Fi, some with 3G or 4G wireless cellular technology, others with satellite technology. But the point is we're living in a hyper-connected environment. You just think about your personal life, right? How many of your devices were connected 2 or 3 years ago versus what you have today? We've been on the journey of wirelessly connecting machines at AT&T for over a dozen years. And for most of those companies 12 plus years ago, this was, how do I tinker with wireless cellular technology? At the time, if you think back then, networks weren't as robust. The hardware ecosystem wasn't as robust. Hardware was expensive. Network costs were expensive. And we've seen a dramatic trend not only in the way that the economics work over the last number of years, but we've also seen, again, getting back to that stat that I opened up with, enterprises fundamentally understanding technology could change. And so they started to force the conversation with not only the wireless carriers, but the ecosystem on how do you make this hardened and scalable. And what I want you to think about, for those of you who didn't raise your hand, that you have something in production, but yet you think you might in the next 2 or 3 years, what I want you to think about is beyond wireless technology. What else does it take to actually deliver an end-to-end scalable, and in many cases global, solution? Let's start with networks for just a minute. Because from AT&T, I may start the conversation with cellularly enabling a device with 3G or 4G connectivity. But more and more of our customers are coming to us and saying, you know what, I need a broader communication stack. Right? Think about a vending machine on a campus environment like the Rio Hotel here. Many of those vending machines may be wired, right? Ethernet or some other wire connectivity going into the vending machine. Other vending machines may have Wi-Fi connectivity. Other vending machines may have 4G cellular, okay? But they're looking for a common platform infrastructure to be able to manage those assets. Take heavy equipment tractor manufacturers. They may manufacture tractors in the United States, and they may use cellular coverage where available. And then in remote parts of the world where there's no cellular connectivity, they move to satellite. Or a large shipping container cargo tracking solution that uses satellite on the high seas, but then moves to wireless connectivity when it comes to land. Right? So the importance of how do these technologies and these connections and the networks actually manifest. I want you to think about devices. You know, we're not talking about walking into a consumer store, a retail store, and taking devices off the shelf and building your next scalable machine-to-machine solution. We're talking in many cases of devices that are built specifically, they're purpose-built devices for different verticals. Think about on that ocean example that I just put out there, a device that has to stand up to the environmental conditions of being on the ocean for 5 to 7 years. How is that different? How is that engineered differently than some of the other devices you might see across the ecosystem? There are point solutions in machine-to-machine technology, but more often than not, many of our customers come to us and they say there's nothing that actually fits what we need. And so they're looking for something a little bit more custom. And so how do companies actually start to make available tools and application platforms, cloud, storage, analytics, right? So that these companies can quickly get to market. And whether you develop that application in-house with your own IT organization or you look to a third party, the tool sets, the client libraries, right, that ecosystem becomes incredibly important from a developer perspective. I also want you to think about, as you deploy these solutions, the broader topic of professional services. How do you do staging, kitting, device logistics when you're talking about deploying perhaps tens of thousands of devices in a very short period of time? Again, perhaps not just only in your backyard in the United States, but in other countries as your business operations expand. But what I would say to you is put technology aside for just a minute. The single largest reason why I see projects stall is not because of technology. It's because of the business model and the business internal politics many times within a corporation as they start to really understand, can we take this to market? Is the IT organization on the same page as the operations organization? Is the marketing organization on the same page? And that internal debate oftentimes can stall many of these projects. And so, to the extent I can offer a safety tip, words of wisdom today, really think through your business planning early in the conversation. We talk about wireless technologies transforming companies. Stick with the topic of business model for just a minute. GE put out a very interesting research study about a year and a half ago, and I'd encourage you to read it if you're not familiar with it. It's entitled, The Industrial Internet, and GE's perspective on that. But what their hypothesis was, if you actually think about the power of 1%, and you could increase productivity in a number of verticals. Think about the airline industry, think about the medical industry, think about oil and gas. 1% productivity in terms of real-time monitoring of those machines, passing that information into a real-time predictive analytics engine, you could start to transform an industry to the tune of $10 to $15 trillion over 15 years. That's big, big money. Now, not just for GE, but again, think about the broader impact to the industry and their downstream clients and customers that they impact. I want you to think about globalization. For many of you, you might be thinking about a machine-to-machine solution today and have no vision about how that plays on the global stage. But I challenge many of you to think through how it may over the next 3 to 5 years. An interesting stat I heard, 7 of the 10 companies that are yet to make it into the Fortune 1000, okay, by 2020 will be based outside of the developed, okay? So think about the emerging markets. Think about the skill sets in the infrastructure in some of those countries. Are they there to actually support the solutions that you're building? If you're building a heavy equipment piece of machinery from the United States and you're shipping it globally, how do you ensure that when that tractor powers up in a remote part of the world, you can actually get the same level, the same quality of service, if you will, that you have in more of the developed nations? It's a very interesting thing to think through as you have expansion strategies in place. Think about regulatory and compliance. You think about the medical space. Some of you are actually building devices right now in the medical space. A lot of regulation around that will drive your product development and realization. Even something as basic as AVL fleet tracking, right? Tracking big rigs across the United States. What you may not know is that, that's one of the more mature machine-to-machine examples, but only 20% of the trucks in the United States are actually tracked on a regular basis. But think about things like hours of service. Think about, if you're the owner, compliance relative to hard braking, or did my driver who had a hazardous material actually go down the right street that was designated for the routing of hazardous material, right? Those compliance and regulatory things become very important. And the next point there that's driving this conversation is around the ecosystem. And what I would challenge you to think about is who you partner with. I don't believe there are many companies on the earth today that truly have all parts, all elements of bringing a machine-to-machine solution together. Machine-to-machine technology is, in many ways, by definition, a combination of best-in-class ecosystem partners in the professional services environment, in the software space, in the hardware space, in the networking space, coming together. And it forced us as a company to actually step back with a number of other large corporations earlier this year, including GE, IBM, Cisco, Intel, and now well over 70 companies in total, to form something called the Industrial Internet Consortium. And the purpose here was we all realized we could not go it alone, especially again as we think about not only the environment in the States, but as we look to move abroad. And this group is really around how do we start to think through best practices, how do we start to influence standards, okay? And it also started to manifest in a way that many of these companies are now starting to build solutions together. A good example, you'll see IBM's logo there. IBM has a very, very strong, a very robust strategy relative to connected or smarter cities. You've probably seen their advertising. You think about wireless video surveillance. You think about the field service workers in a city. You think about wireless utility meter reading infrastructure, parking meters, right? The list goes on. How do they start to incorporate smarter intelligence into those machines? GE, I referenced earlier with their 1% study. But what I want you to think about is real-time diagnostics from jet engines, locomotives, medical imaging devices, anywhere in the world so that they can build and predict and maintain equipment much more efficiently. Let me talk about a couple of verticals that we're seeing transform right beneath our eyes. So these are not hypotheticals. This stuff is around the corner in the next couple of years. These are real examples I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to start on the far left, or my left, with a big, heavy container that's being put on a forklift up onto a ship. You've all seen this if you've been by any dockyard. What I want you to do for just a minute is pretend you're a shrimp farmer in Thailand, okay? And your goal is to move the shrimp from Thailand to Chicago, Illinois, okay? In today's environment, that shrimp is put on a truck, it's brought to the yard, it's put onto a cargo container, similar to that blue box there. It's shipped across the country in a refrigerated container, across the ocean in a refrigerated container. It hits the port of Los Angeles. It goes from the ship to a truck. It might go to a rail car, maybe a day-and-a-half journey from Los Angeles to Chicago, goes to a truck, and then to the final seafood distribution center in Illinois. Now, what happened if the refrigeration unit actually had an issue? What if a belt blew? What if it ran out of fuel? What if the temperature range got out of compliance? What if the back of the container was actually cool because that's where the refrigeration unit was, but someone didn't actually close the door on the cargo container properly, so the front end of the container was actually letting in hot air, and so you had a different temperature range from the front of the container to the back, okay? With real-time monitoring, this cargo tracking solution that was built out, that now works in over 135 countries, this company can take real-time action immediately anywhere in that supply chain, dramatically changing how they deal with their suppliers, their vendors, and ultimately how they will price their services back to their customers. A very interesting and unique change to an industry that truly hasn't changed in 1,000 years. Think about the medical space. We have a customer of ours that introduced a very interesting solution just a few months ago. Think about a big medical cart in a hospital that has pharmaceuticals in it. And if you're a nurse or you're a doctor, you go to this cart to take medication out. This cart now can monitor who actually logged in, inventory controls. It can push firmware updates down to the cart. And you say, okay, well, why would you put a 4G radio in a medical cart in a hospital? Because what you may not know if you're not in that industry is many of the medical carts that show up in the hospital rooms aren't connected, or they are, and someone trips over the cable and it becomes disconnected. or medical carts actually used or needed in a different part of the hospital that had no coverage or no connectivity. And so this company stepped back and they said, you know what, we're going to actually bypass the IT department in the hospital, and we're going to put wireless technology into these carts, and we're going to put this in our own control. I want you to think of another example with remote patient monitoring. Ericsson Corporation, a great ecosystem partner of ours, was just awarded and recognized for a remote patient monitoring solution that AT&T and Ericsson brought to market. The use case study is fairly simple. I go into the hospital, I have heart surgery. In the old days, I recovered in the hospital. Think about the expense, etc. Versus today, I can go home and recover in the comfort of my own home, and my doctor can see real-time diagnostics coming off of that machine with wireless connectivity. You'll see here vehicle and pedestrian monitoring. Think about this. You want to build a store in Dallas, Texas, and you narrow it down to Frisco, Texas, where I happen to live. But you're not sure exactly where in Frisco, Texas it makes sense to build your retail store. We have a partner that has actually built out sensors to actually look at people and traffic patterns that can actually tell me where the best place to build that facility might be. And then once I build that facility, start to give me real-time analytics on the flow of people by my store, how many people are actually stopping versus going on, right? And you can start to get into a very interesting conversation about, am I positioned appropriately with my setting? And the last one is around global air cargo tracking. AT&T just announced yesterday a very interesting solution that allows companies to track high-value air cargo anywhere there's a wireless GSM network in the world. And the concept here is this tracking device looks at temperature, humidity, shock, seal control to see if someone tampered with the unit. And it's always tracking that data, and it's sending it back over the wireless network. Think about it now in the belly of an aircraft. As that airplane takes off, that device actually flips into airplane mode. It's still tracking the data. So it's on in the belly of the aircraft. When the plane lands, comes out of airplane mode and starts to send that data again anywhere in the world. Now you may say, okay, is that really a big deal? I swear to you,